The city skyline still shimmered with neon light, when Alexander Hayes, a millionaire father with a reputation for discipline and cold efficiency, turned his car toward his gated estate. It was only Thursday. No one expected him home, least of all his son or the maid he had recently hired. The mansion loomed in silence as Alexander pushed open the heavy oak doors. Normally, the house greeted him with quiet emptiness, the hum of the heater and the faint echo of his own footsteps. But tonight, something unusual reached his ears, a sound he hadn't heard in months. Laughter. It was high and clear, the laughter of a child unburdened by pain. His heart jolted. For weeks, his 5-year-old son Ethan had known only frustration and tears. Born with weak legs, the boy had grown accustomed to his crutches, but not to joy. Since the death of Alexander's wife, the child rarely smiled. Alexander froze in the hallway listening. Another sound followed the steady rhythm of encouragement. A woman's voice, warm with patience. "Just one more step, Ethan. You can do it. I'm right here." The voice belonged to Sofia, the maid. She had been hired to keep the household running, not to involve herself in matters of the family. Alexander had made that perfectly clear, and yet here she was. He followed the voices down the corridor, his polished shoes muffled against the rug. The door to the sunroom stood slightly ajar. Light spilled out, accompanied by gasps of effort and bursts of laughter. Alexander pushed the door wider, and the sight before him made his breath catch. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, his small hands gripping a pair of training crutches. His legs trembled, sweat dotted his brow, but determination blazed in his eyes. And beside him, kneeling low, was Sofia. Her hands hovered near his arms, not holding, not carrying, but guiding. "Step." And step, she whispered, her voice steady as a heartbeat. Ethan took another shaky stride, then another. When he stumbled, Sofia caught him lightly, steadied him, and smiled with such radiant pride it filled the room like sunlight. "You did it," she laughed. "That's 3 more steps than yesterday." Ethan beamed, cheeks flushed with victory. "Mama would be proud," he whispered. The words pierced Alexander's chest like an arrow. He staggered silently in the doorway, unseen. For months he had buried himself in work, telling himself it was for Ethan's future. He convinced himself that distance was discipline, that money would replace the comfort he didn't know how to give. He had believed his son's disability was a wall they would never overcome. Yet here, in the soft glow of the sunroom, the wall was crumbling not by doctors or expensive treatments, but by the quiet persistence of a maid who had refused to give up. Ethan suddenly looked up, eyes bright. Papa Alexander stiffened. The boy had spotted him. Sofia turned too startled, her face flushing. She scrambled to her feet, murmuring apologies. "Sir, I didn't mean to overstep. He wanted to try, and I thought..." But Alexander barely heard her. His eyes remained on his son, standing tall on trembling legs, smiling wider than he had in months. In that moment, the millionaire father, who believed he controlled every aspect of life, realized a truth that left him shaken. Sometimes, the greatest change comes from where you least expect it. Long before the laughter in the sunroom, silence had reigned in the Hayes mansion. Alexander Hayes had built his fortune on precision and control. Every deal was calculated, every risk weighed. He carried the same philosophy into his private life, until fate reminded him that money cannot shield a man from loss. 5 years earlier, the night Ethan was born, Alexander's wife Clara never left the hospital. Complications stole her life, even as Ethan's first cries filled the room. Alexander remembered standing numb beside the hospital bed, torn between joy and grief so sharp it left him hollow. He swore to raise Ethan alone, but his way of coping was to bury himself in work. At first, he convinced himself it was necessary. "I'm building a legacy for him," he muttered to colleagues while signing contracts late into the night. But the truth was harsher. He didn't know how to sit with Ethan's pain, how to face the boy's fragile legs, how to be both father and mother. Doctors explained Ethan's condition, gently weak muscles, delayed motor skills, years of therapy required. Alexander signed every form, paid for every specialist. But he never stayed long in the therapy rooms. The sight of Ethan struggling tore him apart, and so he hid in boardrooms instead. The boy grew quiet, withdrawn. He spent hours in his room, his world limited to crutches and books. On rare evenings when Alexander returned early, he would find Ethan asleep clutching a photograph of Clara. Each time, guilt twisted deeper, but Alexander only responded the way he knew best, by working harder. It was into this fractured household that Sofia Alvarez arrived. She was not the glamorous, polished nanny the agency had first offered. Instead, she came recommended by an old friend of the family, a woman in her late 20s with calloused hands and a humble resume. She applied only for the role of maid. Alexander barely noticed her at first. She worked quietly, keeping the house spotless, meals simple but warm. She spoke little, eyes lowered, blending into the background. But Ethan noticed. One afternoon, Alexander returned unexpectedly and found his son at the kitchen table giggling as Sofia taught him how to knead dough. Flour dusted Ethan's hair, his crutches leaned against the chair, forgotten for a moment. It was the first genuine laugh Alexander had heard from his son in months. Something about Sofia drew the boy out of his shell. She never pitied him. When Ethan complained about his legs, she didn't hush him or change the subject. Instead, she said softly, "My younger brother was like you. His legs were weak too. We tried every day, little by little, and one day he took his first steps. I know you can too." Her words carried weight, not empty comfort. For Sofia had lived that reality. Back in her hometown, poverty had forced her family to rely on each other. She had cared for her younger brother Mateo, whose disability mirrored Ethan's. She remembered the long nights, encouraging him, the triumph of each step, and the heartbreak when illness claimed him before he turned 10. Sofia carried that grief quietly, but it became a flame of empathy she could not extinguish. So when she saw Ethan's frustration, she refused to let him surrender. She encouraged him to stand longer, to balance with courage, to try again after every stumble. She applauded every inch of progress as if it were a mile. Little by little, Ethan responded. He began to smile again, to push himself further, to believe. And so on the night Alexander came home unannounced, it was not by accident that Ethan stood trembling in the sunroom. It was the result of weeks of Sofia's patience, of late-night encouragements, of her quiet conviction that the boy could achieve what everyone else, including his father, had stopped hoping for. The room hung in silence after Ethan's small voice broke the spell. "Papa?" Alexander's throat tightened. He hadn't realized tears were brimming in his son's eyes, not from pain, but from joy. Ethan had just taken steps on his own. The boy stood straighter, wobbling, but proud, his little face shining. Sofia quickly stepped back, her hands still hovering near Ethan in case he fell. Her cheeks flushed as she whispered, "Mr. Hayes, I didn't mean to overstep." Alexander entered fully, his footsteps heavy against the tiles. His eyes shifted from Ethan's trembling legs to the maid who stood like a child caught red-handed. You were hired to clean, his voice cut through the quiet, cold and sharp, not to involve yourself in matters that are not yours. Sofia lowered her gaze, shame burning her cheeks. "I only wanted to help him. He begged me to try. I couldn't ignore him." Alexander's heart battled itself. Anger rose. How dare she take liberties with his son's condition without permission? Yet pride swelled, too undeniable and fierce. His boy had walked. Ethan, who had been told again and again that his progress would be slow, had taken steps right before his eyes. Ethan's voice, small but firm, pierced the tension. "Papa, don't be mad. Sofia, she believes in me. She helps me when no one else does." Alexander froze. No one else. Was that how his son saw him, as absent, as someone who had already given up? The weight of Ethan's words pressed heavily on him. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that his distance had been for Ethan's future, for stability, for security. But looking into his son's hopeful eyes, the excuses withered. The following days were taut with unspoken tension. Alexander returned home earlier than usual, watching silently from the shadows of hallways. He saw Sofia guiding Ethan in small exercises, steadying him as he balanced between chairs, encouraging him to lift one foot after another. "Good, Ethan. Even one more step is victory," she would whisper, clapping softly when the boy succeeded. Ethan's laughter filled the house again. The sound, once rare, became more common. But the staff began to murmur. Wealthy households thrived on gossip, and soon whispers floated. The maid is teaching the boy. The master doesn't approve. Perhaps she's trying to replace the mother. At a charity gala, Alexander overheard acquaintances snickering behind glasses of wine. Hayes's maid is acting like a tutor now. What's next? The governess of his estate. The remarks stung not because of ridicule, but because Alexander himself wasn't sure how to answer them. He had not confronted Sofia again, not after that night. Yet the image of Ethan's determined steps haunted him. One evening, Alexander finally confronted her. He found Sofia in the library, kneeling beside Ethan as the boy attempted to walk the length of the carpet. His arms shook, sweat dotted his brow, but he gritted his teeth with determination. "That's enough," Alexander said firmly. Sofia startled, immediately steadying Ethan back into a chair. "I'm sorry, sir." He insisted. Alexander raised a hand. His eyes softened as they landed on Ethan, who looked both guilty and proud. "Son, go to your room. I need a word with Sofia." Ethan hesitated, then hobbled toward the stairs with his crutches. He glanced back once, his eyes silently pleading, "Don't take her away." When they were alone, Alexander's voice dropped low. "Why are you doing this? Why risk your position, your reputation, by overstepping what I asked of you?" Sofia met his gaze, her dark eyes steady despite her trembling hands. "Because he deserves more than pity. He deserves to believe he can. I've seen boys like him before, Mr. Hayes. They give up because no one dares to hope with them. I won't let Ethan give up." Her words sliced through him. For a moment he saw not a maid, but a woman who understood his son in ways he himself had failed. But pride flared again. "You think you know better than specialists, than doctors, than me?" "No," Sofia whispered, her eyes glistening. "I only know what it feels like to fight for a child who may never have tomorrow. My brother, he had the same struggle. I lost him. I won't stand by and watch another child I love lose hope." The rawness in her voice shook Alexander more than he expected. His reply faltered, caught between anger and the sting of truth. That night, as Alexander lay awake, Ethan's laughter drifted faintly down the hall. For the first time, he wondered if the maid's courage to hope was what his family had been missing all along. But hope came at a cost, and Alexander was not yet ready to pay it. The following morning, Alexander sat in his study, staring at a half-finished report on his laptop. Words blurred into nonsense. His mind replayed Sofia's voice from the night before. "My brother. He had the same struggle. I lost him." The vulnerability in her tone had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Sofia had not spoken like an employee defending her position. She had spoken like someone who had lived the pain etched into Ethan's little body. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Green, the housekeeper. She shifted nervously in the doorway. "Sir, forgive me, but I thought you should know something about Miss Sofia." Alexander frowned. "Go on." Mrs. Green hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She's not just a maid, sir. Before she came here, she cared for her younger brother, Mateo. He was born with weak legs like Ethan. She spent years helping him walk, teaching him to fight for every step. The boy managed more progress than doctors thought possible, but he passed away from illness a year ago. She hasn't spoken of it much. I only learned from a friend of hers in town." Alexander leaned back, stunned. So it was true. Every word Sofia had spoken last night carried the weight of lived experience. She had not been defying him out of arrogance. She had been reliving her own battle through his son. Later that day, Alexander found himself standing at the doorway of the sunroom again. Ethan was there with Sofia working on his balance. She knelt in front of him, her hands open, but never touching, guiding with words rather than force. "Good, Ethan. Strong back. You don't need to rush. One more step." "Yes, that's it." Ethan stumbled, nearly toppling, but Sofia caught him gently and whispered, "You're braver than you think." The boy smiled through sweat, determination etched across his young face. Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to scold Sofia again for disregarding limits. He wanted to assert his authority, to remind her of her role. But what he saw was undeniable. Ethan thriving, Ethan trying, Ethan believing. And then Ethan looked up beaming. "Papa, did you see? I walked 4 steps today." The pride in his son's voice disarmed him completely. Alexander stepped into the room slowly. "Yes, son," he said softly. "I saw." Sofia lowered her gaze as though bracing for reprimand, but Alexander surprised them both. He asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me about your brother?" Sofia's eyes widened. She looked at Mrs. Green in the corner, then back at Alexander. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Because my past isn't an excuse. I didn't want pity, sir. I only wanted to help. Mateo, he didn't have the chances Ethan has. But for a time, he believed in himself because someone believed in him. I thought, maybe I could give that gift to your son." Her words struck him like a hammer against stone. For years, Alexander had believed providing money doctors and the best equipment was enough. But what Ethan needed wasn't just resources, it was relentless hope. And he, in his grief and pride, had failed to give it. That night, Alexander sat with Ethan at dinner. The boy chattered excitedly about his progress, about how Sofia encouraged him. Alexander listened in silence, his throat thick. For the first time in years, Ethan's eyes glowed with possibility instead of resignation. After Ethan went to bed, Alexander found Sofia in the kitchen washing dishes. The glow of the lamp highlighted the tired lines in her face, but also the quiet strength in her posture. "You've done more for my son in weeks than I've managed in years," Alexander admitted, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I don't know whether to thank you or feel ashamed." Sofia dried her hands, meeting his gaze. "Don't be ashamed, sir. You're doing what you know best. Sometimes children just need different kinds of love. Ethan has yours. And mine too." Alexander was silent for a long moment. Then he said, almost to himself, "Maybe that's what I've been afraid of, that someone else could give him what I couldn't." Sofia shook her head gently. "No one can replace a father. But sometimes it takes more than one heart to raise a child." Her words lingered long after she left the room. That night, Alexander stood at Ethan's doorway, watching his son sleep peacefully, the crutches leaning nearby. For the first time in years, hope stirred in him. Not because of wealth or power or plans, but because of a maid with a broken past who had chosen to fight for his son. And though he wouldn't admit it aloud yet, Alexander knew the truth. His life was beginning to change. The following week, invitations to Alexander Hayes' charity gala flooded the newspapers. It was an annual event, a glittering evening where the wealthy paraded their fortunes and whispered judgments behind champagne flutes. This year, however, gossip swirled before the doors even opened. "Did you hear the Hayes boy is being trained by a maid?" Imagine entrusting your heir to someone with no pedigree. Perhaps grief has finally unhinged him. Alexander heard the rumors long before the gala night. He dismissed them in meetings, but their sting gnawed at him. For years he had cultivated respect and power. Now whispers painted him as reckless. Investors probed cautiously, Thali's avoided eye contact. And at the heart of it all was one simple truth: his son's progress had come not from doctors or therapists, but from Sofia the maid. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and polite laughter. Alexander walked in, Ethan at his side with his crutches. Sofia trailed discreetly behind her presence, unacknowledged by most, though every pair of eyes flicked toward her with curiosity or disdain. Ethan's legs trembled as he tried to walk across the marble floor. Whispers rose like a tide. Poor boy. At least the father can afford the best doctors. Why is the maid so close to them? Alexander's jaw clenched. He wanted to shield Ethan from their pity. But before he could speak, Sofia bent low beside the boy, her voice calm and firm. "Slow steps, Ethan, just like in the sunroom. One foot then the other. Don't listen to them, listen to yourself." The boy's eyes lit with determination. Step by step he crossed the ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he managed 4 or 5 strides without stumbling. For Ethan, it was triumph. For Sofia, it was proof. But for the audience, it was scandal. A man in a tailored suit, an old business associate, muttered loudly enough for all to hear, "This is absurd. That child needs professionals, not the indulgence of a maid who thinks she's a miracle worker." Laughter followed. Ethan faltered, his face flushing. Alexander's blood boiled. He looked around the room, saw the smirks, the lifted brows, the silent judgment. And then he saw Sofia, kneeling by Ethan, whispering encouragement through the boy's tears. Something in him snapped. He stepped forward, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Enough." The chatter ceased. All eyes turned to him. Alexander placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. "This boy," he said, his voice firm, "has done more tonight than any of you will ever understand. He has fought for every step, not because of specialists or wealth, but because someone believed in him when the world told him to give up." He turned toward Sofia, his gaze unwavering. "That someone is this woman, Sofia Alvarez. She came into our home as a maid. But she has been more than that. She has been a teacher, a guide, and a light in my son's life." Gasps filled the room. Sofia's cheeks burned, but her eyes shone with unshed tears. Alexander's voice grew stronger. "You laugh at her because she lacks pedigree. But what pedigree did my wife have when she stood beside me and built our family? What pedigree did I have when I rose from nothing? Respect is not earned by wealth, it is earned by sacrifice. And tonight I stand by Sofia because she has done what money could not. She gave my son hope." Silence fell heavy. No one dared to snicker. Even the most critical lowered their eyes. Ethan, small but proud, tugged his father's hand. "Papa, can we go home?" Alexander smiled, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. "Yes, son. We've already won tonight." For the first time, he had not defended his reputation or fortune. He had defended his family. But he knew the battle wasn't over. Whispers would return. Offers would come tempting Sofia away. And his pride would still wrestle with gratitude. Yet one thing was clear, he could no longer pretend Sofia was just the maid. She was part of their lives now, in a way that changed everything. In the weeks after the gala, the whispers slowly quieted. The tabloids ran short-lived stories about the maid who trained the Hayes boy, but just as quickly moved on to fresher scandals. Inside the mansion, life settled into a fragile but hopeful rhythm. Each day, Ethan grew stronger. He managed longer walks across the sunroom, then the hallway, and finally the garden path. His laughter filled the house again, and each giggle felt like a victory carved from stone. Sofia remained patient, encouraging him through every stumble, celebrating every step. But peace rarely lasts long in the circles of the wealthy. One afternoon, a sleek black car rolled up the driveway. A man stepped out, Richard Belmont, a rival businessman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. At his side walked his wife, adorned in jewels that glittered even in daylight. They came bearing smiles, but Alexander felt the unease in his gut. "Alexander," Richard said smoothly, "I wanted to congratulate you on your boy's progress. Remarkable, truly." His gaze slid toward Sofia, who stood discreetly behind Ethan. "And I hear it's all thanks to her." Sofia shifted uncomfortably, lowering her gaze. Richard's wife leaned in, her voice dripping with charm. "We've been looking for someone just like you, my dear. Imagine what you could do for our daughter. She's the same age as Ethan. Of course we'd pay handsomely. Twice what you make here. Perhaps 3 times. The words hung in the air like bait. Alexander's chest tightened. He waited for Sofia to refuse, but she looked caught, torn between duty and shock. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Richard smirked. "Think about it. A brighter future, less gossip, more recognition. Why remain a maid when you could be a miracle worker?" Alexander's jaw clenched. Something fierce rose in him, not just anger, but fear. The thought of losing Sofia, of Ethan losing her, carved deep into him. He realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just a servant. She was the glue holding his fragile family together. Ethan, sensing tension, clung to Sofia's hand. His small voice trembled. "Papa." "Don't let her go." The plea shattered Alexander's restraint. He stepped forward, his voice ringing with conviction. "She's not going anywhere." Richard arched a brow. "You deny her a better life?" Alexander's eyes burned. Her life is hers to choose. But make no mistake, she's not your commodity to buy. She belongs here with us, with my son. She's part of this family. Gasps rippled through the staff lingering nearby. Even Sofia froze, her eyes wide, tears brimming. Richard chuckled darkly, sensing defeat. Very well, Hayes. But don't be surprised when others see her worth, even if you take her for granted. Alexander's voice was low, steady. I've taken too much for granted already. That ends now. The Belmonts left in a flurry of perfume and polished shoes, their car gliding down the drive. Silence fell heavy in their wake. Sofia turned slowly, her lips trembling. Mr. Hayes, what you said? Alexander cut her off gently. It wasn't for show. I meant every word. You're not just an employee, you're family. And I'll fight anyone who tries to take you from us. Ethan threw his arms around Sofia's waist, his crutches clattering to the floor. I knew it, Papa. I knew she was ours. Sofia's tears spilled freely now, her hand covering her mouth. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she belonged here. The mansion had known grief for so long that joy felt almost foreign. But as weeks turned to months, its walls echoed with something new. Laughter, footsteps, and the sound of a boy's determination. Ethan's progress astonished even his doctors. Each appointment brought wider eyes, shaking heads, and reluctant smiles. Whatever you're doing at home, one physician admitted it's working better than anything we prescribed. The answer was simple: love, patience, and relentless belief. Every morning, Ethan trained in the sunroom with Sofia at his side, Alexander watching more often now instead of hiding behind paperwork. Each evening, they ate together at the same table, a small ritual that slowly stitched the wounds of years past. One crisp spring afternoon, Alexander organized a small gathering in the garden. No gala, no press, just close friends, a few neighbors and the staff who had become family. A path had been cleared across the lawn, lined with blooming flowers. At the end stood a wooden bench draped in sunlight. Sofia knelt before Ethan, straightening his little jacket. Remember, it's not about how fast you go. It's about believing you can reach the end. Ethan nodded, determination burning in his young eyes. His crutches lay nearby, but today he wanted to try without them. The crowd fell silent as he took his first shaky step and then another. His legs trembled, his arms wavered, but his gaze stayed fixed on the bench ahead. Halfway down the path, he stumbled. Gasps rippled through the garden. But before Alexander could rush forward, Sofia crouched low, her voice firm and calm. You're stronger than you think, Ethan. One more step. Ethan clenched his fists, pushed himself upright, and moved again. Step after step, sweat beading his brow, until finally, he reached the bench. The garden erupted in applause. Tears streamed down faces, cheers rang out, and Alexander felt something inside him break open. He knelt beside his son, gathering him into his arms. I've never been prouder in my life, he whispered, his voice thick. Ethan beamed, his little voice shaky. Mama would be proud too. Alexander pressed his forehead against Ethan's. Yes, son, she would. And so am I. The setting sun painted her face in gold. He stood quietly for a moment, watching the woman who had given his son not just strength in his legs, but hope in his heart. Sofia, he said softly, I used to think wealth could buy everything my family needed. I was wrong. You gave Ethan something money never could. And you gave me something too, the courage to hope again. Sofia turned, her eyes glistening. I only did what anyone with love in their heart would do. Alexander shook his head. No, you did more. You became family. For the first time, she didn't protest. She simply smiled, and in her eyes, Alexander saw peace and acceptance that this was where she belonged. Later that night, Alexander tucked Ethan into bed. As the child drifted into sleep, Alexander stepped to the window. In the garden, the flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze. The path Ethan had conquered bathed in moonlight. Beside the path stood a single sunflower Sofia had planted weeks earlier, its golden face tilted upward, chasing the last rays of fading light. Alexander whispered to himself, always toward the light. And in that moment, he knew their home was no longer a house of grief, but a place of healing courage and love. True wealth is not measured in fortune or reputation, but in the courage to protect the ones we love and the patience to believe in what others call impossible. Sometimes, the greatest miracles come not from money or power, but from the quiet persistence of hope.